The very first change I'm going to make would be to our shared view layout. If you can see my overall presentation, okay, my overall presentation changed because I made some updates to my layout. Initially, we had like the ASP default layout. So I changed that, I overlaid that, with this code. I will be like attaching a copy of this layout.cs HTML. If you remember, like second or third week when we had our assignment, I had sent you a bunch of files to copy over like site.cs and these images. If you don't have it, I will again send it. You have to overwrite site.cs and you have to make sure that you include the images in your code. If you do that, because of the images will be used as a background and it creates like a really nice layout for us that looks like a music store. So I will attach this layout.cs HTML for you to just double check and make sure that it looks like that. So the one change I have here is I made this link to be store.browse, and then I'm going to be adding one more link here. So this is going to be cart. There you go. And the second change I'll be making is this jQuery. The jQuery is currently in the, around the footer area, like at the bottom. I am going to be adding it to the header. The reason why I am doing this is because I will be using Ajax in my JavaScript that I will be adding to my local JavaScript file, the music store script or something that we have. So when I use JavaScript in my script, I have to make sure that jQuery is already included. If I don't do that, I will get a problem when it tries to look at like the dollar, So I don't want those problems. So I'm just like adding it here, making sure that it's all good. So I am adding the scripts to the header section of my layout.cs HTML. So that's my first change or second change. The first change was that I added my link here to cart. Okay. So this is really important step that we have to do, even though it looks trivial. Okay, the next thing I'm going to be doing is I'm going to go into my model and then I'm going to add a class called cart.cs. Okay, the cart.cs is going to have a whole bunch of properties. So if you think about it, it should have a reference to, it should have something like a unique identifier called record ID, right? Then it's going to have a GUID, like the GUID GUID, that's going to be the cart ID. This is not going to be unique, not unique. So the cart ID is going to be common for multiple cart items that belong to one user. So if there is one session and I am adding 5 albums, all 5 albums will have the same cart ID. That is how I know whose cart it is. Okay, so I definitely need the cart ID. Let's see, let's go to our album and pull some of the information here. For example, album ID is something I would need. Okay, so that is going to be an integer. Okay, so let us just add the getter and setter. Otherwise, Entity Framework would not know what to do with creating our So I have album ID, cart ID, record ID. Okay, so then I want to add this is called as a navigation property. What it means is this is what is going to link my cart with my album. So this is called as a navigation property. A navigation property always has to be virtual because entity framework is set up in such a way that for MVC, by default it does lazy loading, which means it is not going to like load this album object into memory till somebody asks for it. Okay, and so it will before that it creates like a proxy. I mean, we don't have to go into all the details, but it is going to create a proxy, and for it to create a proxy we have to give it permission by making this object as a virtual object. Okay, if you forget to do the virtual, you're going to get into a lot of trouble, trying to figure out why that's happening. Okay, so I have record ID, cart ID, album, and think about it. So because this is one cart ID, if I like add an album 5 times, the same album, it has to reflect the count. So that's going to be my count. So we definitely need the count. Let's think about it. What else do I need? So some of the properties that I need. Oh, date created. We can like create like a date created here. Not that it's very important. Like a good log for us to know when this was added. So that's some things. So because we have two IDs now, your class is called as cart, and cart ID is what we are using to identify a group of items, not a unique item. So when that happens, entity framework by default assigns primary key to either an element by the name ID or the element by the name class name that has ID. So here it will be class name is cart. So cart ID is going to be the primary key, except we don't want it to be the primary key. So if that is the case, you actually have to like override it with a data annotation here. So for that, we need to use our system.component model.data annotation. So if I like include my data annotation, I get access to this attribute called as key. That is going to tell my entity framework that record ID is the unique primary key, not cart ID. So this is one way to override the convention of MVC and entity framework in that sense. Okay, so we have created our cart ID, like cart object here, like cart class. I think that's it. Album ID is an integer, count is an integer, cart ID is a string. I think that's about it. Okay, so that's our first class that we created. The next class we are going to create is going to be a view model. Okay. Cart view model. So this is going to be used by the index view. So if you remember my awesome little diagram, let's see. Okay, not this one, maybe the next one. If you see this one, this is what we are creating for the view model, which means it has to have a collection of cart items, and then it has to have a cart total. Okay, so let's create a collection of cart items. Before that, let's build the application just to be sure that there are no errors.